Yesterday, I think you listened to Dr. Surabhi Dahiya. Today, we have a very eminent personality, Dr. Rotimi Williams OLATUNJI, who is my close friend. We were together in different conferences, and he's a very good researcher, an expert in public relations and advertising. He is the professor of public relations advertising, and he's also the dean of Lasso School of Communication, Lagos State University in Nigeria. So today he will be interacting with you. I'm so sorry because actually he's the lunch time. India is 4.5 hours ahead Nigeria. May I request my colleague Dr. Shailashri to welcome all the participants and the chief guest. Over to Dr. Shailashri.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, dignitaries, distinguished guests, students and friends. It is our great pleasure to welcome you to the second day of the Media Today International Live Lecture Series 2020 on behalf of Department of Communication, Bangalore University, Bangalore for its first edition. The annual Media Today International Live Lecture Series 2020 is the premier lecture series designed by the Department of Communication, Bangalore University to present and discuss the progress in research, development, standards and applications of the topic related to the mass media today. This lecture series is hosted with varied experts for sharing their latest insights of academic and industrial research, as well as to share their experience, which is unique and distinguished among the global media. It is an honor to welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Venugopal KR. Welcome, sir. Hearty welcome to the chief guest and key speaker of the day, Professor Rotimi Williams OLATUNJI. I welcome all my colleagues. I welcome Professor B.K. Ravi, sir, Chairman, Department of Communication and Chairperson of the lecture series. And I also welcome my colleague Dr. N. Sanjeev Raj, Associate Professor and Convener of the lecture series. I welcome all the professors, academicians, veteran scholars, journalists and media experts, research scholars, students and other friends for joining us today. I take the honor to introduce Professor Rotimi Williams. Rotimi Williams OLATUNJI, PhD, is Professor in Public Relations and Advertising and Dean, School of Communication, Lagos State University, Nigeria. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree, Archaeology, First Class Honours from Obatemi, Ovalovo University. MA and PhD, that is in Communication and Language Arts, University of Ibadan, Nigeria. His area of research are advertising, economy, societies, political communication, health communication, public relations, and communication research. His recent publications are curricula and pedagogic issues in media and entertainment studies. Entertainment media, redefining reality, situating entrepreneurship, health crisis communication, and post-Ebola virus disease containment in Lagos State, Nigeria. He also authored Dimensions of Advertising Theory and Practice in Africa. He is a member of many professional bodies. He is the member of Board of Regents, Governing Council of Covenant University. Fellow American Academic of Marketing Science, member Nigeria Institute of Public Relations, Associate Registered Practitioner in Advertising, member Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria, member African Council for Communication Education. He is also honorary member of Public Relations Society, India. Bangalore University proudly presents Professor Rotimi Williams OLATUNJI to talk on the topic Infodemics of Covid-19 pandemic crisis, communication and social responsibility messaging in Africa. I heartily welcome you, sir, and over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, India, and our colleagues globally. It's a great honor to be invited to speak to this august body, primarily at Bangalore State University and our global audience. It's a great privilege to be associated with the chairman of the faculty, Professor B.K. Ravi. We first met in Morocco in 2010. That was pretty like 20 years ago. and the relationship has been growing stronger. He thereafter invited me to India, and I was part of the Indian Public Relations Society communications program then. I'm eagerly looking forward to another opportunity of coming over to India. I had the privilege of sending one of my sons to India for his postdoctoral, his postgraduate program. So I'm back home at India. With the kind permission of the faculty, I'd like to share my slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please, could you allow me to share my slide?
Yeah, we will start. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Okay. Now, I'm speaking this afternoon on infodemics of COVID-19 pandemics. And we're looking at crisis communication and social responsibility approaches to the management of COVID-19.
Next.
Is this not moving? Please, are you okay? You are sharing for me. Thank you. Now, our discussion guide is as listed. We're going to be looking at some of the current data on COVID-19. We're also going to be looking at crisis communication and how applicable this is to the management of COVID-19. And then we're going to look at some cases in Nigeria and in Africa, how governments have been responding to the management of COVID-19. And then we're going to look at the implications of this for infodemics, for crisis management, and for public relations. And we're going to look at the dimension of social responsibility messaging. Next slide. Thank you. Well, it is not new any longer that the world is ravaged by the coronavirus disease that we call novel coronavirus disease, but it's more than 8 months now, and so it is no longer new to us, but they present a lot of complexities. As at 12th of July, we've had over 12.5 million confirmed cases with mortality that can never be imagined all over the place. The introductory statement says that for all the Athenians and foreigners who are there, spend their time in nothing else but in either telling or to hear some new thing. That goes to show that the global community is just interested in one thing now, and that is to talk about COVID-19. And that's why we are here. Next slide, please. Thank you. Well, the world had experienced physically 2 world wars, World War I, World War II, with fatalities, deaths, destructions that are harrowing. The current situation presents itself as another world war, although not a physical one, but in the dimension of previous wars in terms of fatalities and in terms of destructions, economic dislocations, social dislocations, health dislocations, and things are no longer normal. We can no longer live our lives the way we used to live them. So this evidently presents a case of crisis. Next slide. Now, the Center for Disease Control, Atlanta, identified certain commonly asked questions that people want to know when there is a crisis like this. For example, people are interested in finding out to what extent is COVID-19 going to affect me and my family? Are we going to be safe? What have the organizations that are handling COVID-19, what have they found concerning how to address this pandemic? What can they do to protect my life and that of my family? And people are also interested, who caused this? and how can we fix it. But the world has gone beyond looking for who caused COVID-19. If we continue in that trajectory, we are surely not going to get solutions to this. Of course, we know where it originated, but as to who caused it, we cannot answer that question in a definitive way. So, when there is crisis of any dimension, people want to know, they want facts and figures. They want to be empowered with information for decision making. And everybody, sectors of the community want to feel involved in not just fixing the problem, but also coming out of the problem. So people are interested in knowing how they can recover their well-being. And so these are the issues bothering the minds of the global citizens today. And I believe it also bothers our mind too in this conference. Next slide. Thank you. Now, what really is crisis from the point of view of public relations? Rely on a quotation from SAPRE 2003. Although it looks old, however, it is the content of it that we are interested in now, because nothing has changed about nature of crisis. Crisis refers to an event, a revelation, an allegation, or a set of circumstances that threaten the integrity, reputation, and survival of an individual or an organization. Well, there you will see that there are different types of issues or crises there, issues about reputation crisis and so on and so forth. But what we are interested in at this forum is survivor crisis, because the first law of nature is survivor. And that's why everybody in the global community wants to come out of COVID-19 alive. So that, in a way, tells us about crisis. Crisis generally challenges the public sense of safety, value system, appropriateness of handling procedures. And a crisis is defined here as a very significant threat to operations that can be negative and impact on ways of life negatively. So any disruptions in the normal ways of doing things that have adverse consequences is referred to as crisis. And there are different threats when there are crisis situations, including threats to public safety, financial loss, reputation loss, and so on. But in this lecture, we are not just interested in financial losses or reputation, but we are interested in public safety, because this is what threatens our life today. The next one. Okay, so what are the nature of crisis when we see one? How can we recognize one? Well, we see that when there's a crisis, there is generally instability, there is danger, there is threat to life, existence is threatened, things are no longer normal. And that's why the new terminologies that we hear now refers to new normals and so on and so forth, because we can no longer continue the way we used to do things. And so once you see crisis, it presents a situation whereby you can no longer go on in the old or normal way of life. And that is the exact situation that we are in now. COVID-19 pandemic has presented itself as with all the characteristics of conflicts, of crisis that we can identify. Next, please. So, well, in public relations, we try to classify crisis based on several terminologies or classifications or sub-classifications. For example, individuals could have crisis, organizations could have it, it could be in terms of society-wide. And in the present instance, COVID-19 is society-wide kind of crisis. and that is why they call it a pandemic. If it's an epidemic, it may be limited to a section of a country or a whole country, but when it is a pandemic, then it is the whole global community. And so when you classify conflict based on personal, organizational, or society based, then we have COVID-19 being classified as globally connected type of crisis. Then there is also the issue of scandal. We are not talking of reputation here, so we are not bothered about that. Another way is to look at crisis in terms of whether it is man-made or it is natural or it is accidental. So you see, in this case, we cannot say COVID-19 is man-made, except those who want to subscribe to the hypothesis of conspiracy theory, which I do not subscribe to at this forum. And then crisis can be classified as either accident or disaster. Well, this one is a disaster, it's not an accident. The second way of looking at crisis is immediate crisis. So we can classify COVID-19 as the ongoing, the happening now kind of crisis. Well, it can also be an emerging crisis because it is evolving. It's an ongoing phenomenon. And so we can see it in that regard. And then the third category there is to see it as sustained crisis because it has lasted more than 8 months now. And experts are predicting that we're going to live with it for some time to come. Well, it can also be classified as sustained. But the one that I'm interested in today's presentation is the classification of conflicts based on known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown knowns. Let's go to the next slide to see how we try to, okay, you discover that when COVID-19 broke, there are many things that the world community has not known about it. When it is known and known, these are things that we know, or it is within the purview of general knowledge. So within a particular society, we know, for example, in Nigeria about the Islamic jihadist movement that we call Boko Haram, and we know that they are ravaging the northeastern part of Nigeria. Just like in India, we know of separatist groups that are constituting challenges to the generality of the society. So this can fall under known, but COVID-19 is not within that realm. Second is known unknown. Things we know that we don't know, or we don't know their potential risk. Well, now for 8 months now, we know that COVID-19 has a lot of risk now because of the benefit of hindsight. There's the concept of unknown knowns, things that exist and have been influencing our lives, but we do not realize their value. But where I'm going really is unknown. Despite the expertise knowledge over COVID-19, despite the breakthrough the global community has been making about COVID-19, there are still many things that we don't know about COVID-19. Just yesterday, the focus of WHO changed from just droplets to making COVID-19 airborne disease. That presents another complexity about the disease. So there are still a lot of things that we do not know about COVID-19. Now, next slide. So, because of this issue of known, unknown that surrounds COVID-19, what do we now have? A lot of individuals, groups, organizations try to compete to share information about COVID-19. And in 1964, a scholar called Gross said he came up with that terminology, information overload. And information overload is about a situation whereby there is a deluge of information that is difficult to handle at the same time, and it presents challenges for those that have information overload. As the visual there shows, you see that the world knowledge base has gone exponentially over that of the previous centuries put together, all thanks to telecommunications, internet, and other forms of access to information. If it were in those days, I would need to travel for a day or two to come over to India to present this lecture. But because of the access to information globally now, we see that we can share information across the globe. So COVID-19 pandemic is a problem, and greater still is that issue of information overload. We are not just fighting an epidemic, we are fighting infodemic, says the Director General of WHO. Next. Okay, well, I just did a kind of internet research, as it were, and I tried to look at the information that we have online about COVID-19 based on the different available platforms. And this was carried out by May 2020. I did a check yesterday. The figure has gone beyond this, and this only relates to Nigeria. Information about COVID-19 on internet news, that's 3 billion plus, and it's like 88.6%. And look at WhatsApp messages. In Nigeria alone, we have 83 million. And then you look at Instagram on COVID-19, you have 1.7 million again. And then online newspaper items globally, you have 1.3. And then online advertisements are 2.7. That's for the global community. And look at that of Nigeria. So you see that internet news, WhatsApp messages, tweets, Instagram, they bring up information on a real-time basis, which make the receivers of information to be inundated with messages that their ability cannot cope with. Let's go to the next slide. Well, in the African context, what does this translate to? Well, essentially, Africans are family-oriented. They maintain relationship with family members, with friends, with colleagues at work, and so on and so forth. And then when they see information that could do good, that they believe could benefit their colleagues or their friends, they easily want to share this information through any available platform. And this has encouraged a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and fake news about COVID-19. Well, there are certain myths that were circulated here in Nigeria and also online. For example, that 5G network is the cause of COVID-19. And then the several myths about it, by drinking hot water alone, you can prevent COVID-19. Once you catch it, it is death sentence. And if you have cold and your breath, and you are having catarrh, you already have COVID-19. Drinking of alcohol will protect you, and so on and so forth. So you see that a lot of fake news go on about COVID-19. And it's not just in Nigeria alone, in most parts of Africa, and even on a global level, to the extent that the WHO recognizes it as a threat to management of COVID-19. Let's look at the next slide. Let's look at the next slide. Thank you. So in Nigeria, there's a tsunami of misinformation and disinformation that has accompanied the coronavirus spread, provoking fear and exploiting vulnerabilities. Many Nigerians simply refuse to believe that the disease is real. There's a fear of the unknown and a deluge of information in the digital space, which creates fertile ground for fake news. Nigerians may be particularly vulnerable, not just because they are uniquely gullible, but because of weak communications between the government and the governed, the high reference for miracle healing, and a dilapidated healthcare system. These are situations that predispose people to being victims of fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. And this also cuts across different African societies and some other parts of the globe. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Now, let's look at some cases, some case studies of messages that went online during this ongoing COVID-19. Number one, WhatsApp message in Hausa suggested that just taking garlic will prevent the outbreak of COVID-19. There's another one that says when coronavirus broke out, that Africans are not susceptible to COVID-19. It says because of our environment, because of our hot weather, it cannot spread. And that created a lot of problem that made the response rate initially to be slow, which was a fertile ground for the spread of it. And then there was also this thought that it was just a Chinese disease. People just thought.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, am I on track? Thank you. So people thought it was a Chinese disease. And so all of these are instances of misinformation and disinformation. Let's look at even presidents of nations in Africa, like President John Magufuli of Tanzania, who said that just by inhaling steams can off the virus. And then there in India, a yoga adherent said that yoga could cure coronavirus. And a governor in Kenya said by drinking hot drink, you could sanitize yourself against COVID-19. These are instances of misinformation, not just in Africa, but also globally. Let's go on. Thank you. Now, what are the consequences of these infodemics of the pandemic? There is stress and anxiety all over the place. And this is natural because anything that affects people's life, living and livelihood is bound to create stress. And then there is rumor, false news, fake news, and so on. Then it becomes difficult for people to understand what is going on because information comes from the left, from the right, from the center. So that has made it an infodemics, a kind of epidemic of a sort. And then there's poor judgment on the part of individuals. People don't know what to do. Citizens feel overwhelmed and powerless. Infodemics generally discourage voluntary testing because people don't know what, and escape from isolation camps. People run away from treatment centers because of all this fear that have been built around the pandemic. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide. So now, how do we now use the crisis communication management approach to addressing the issue of COVID-19? Crisis management is a process, and when you go through that process, then you can apply it to addressing the issue of COVID-19. Unfortunately, because COVID-19 is a crisis that nobody expected, it became very difficult for people to plan about how to use communication to address. But as we're going to see, some experiences in the past can also be fall back onto to address this. So there are three stages of crisis. There is a pre-crisis period, there is a crisis period, a response period, and then there is a post-crisis period. We will see how this plays out as we go. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. Now, I want to look at the pre-crisis of COVID-19 and see how it had played out on the African continent and in the response to COVID-19 crisis. The first approach is that you must have crisis management plan and update that crisis at least annually. We see that This could be possible when things are normal, when you are anticipating a particular crisis, and then you can put up crisis management plans well ahead. However, you can also leverage on previous experiences in designing crisis management plan. I've gone through to the website of the WHO, and I see that they have crisis management plans, but they are not exactly about COVID-19, but they cannot be applicable to COVID-19. So most African countries, like the rest of the global community, were unprepared for COVID-19, and so they could not have put in place elaborate plans at the crisis management phase. But for some of the African countries that had the misfortune of having experienced other forms of health crisis like this, Ebola virus disease, for example, and Lassa fever, countries that have gone through such horrendous experience, they had some experiences to fall back to, and Nigeria happens to be one, because we had just an index case of Ebola virus disease. So Nigeria was able to leverage on that, but there was no any elaborate plan about COVID-19. Well, the second activity is that you must have a designated crisis management team. Of course, most African countries do not have one, or did not have one in place before the outbreak. Conduct exercises at least annually. These are things that should be done, whether a crisis is anticipated or not. Every country, every society, every organization must always have its crisis management plan. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now we are in the crisis period now. This is the era of COVID-19. What are the things that we should do? This particular phase has two components of it: the initial crisis response and the reputation repair and behavioral changes aspect. Let's see how that works out in the next slide. The initial crisis. Now, in Africa, as in some other places, these are some of what we saw from the initial crisis phase of COVID-19. What did we see? Be quick and try to have initial response within the first hour. Well, let's give it to the Lagos State government in Nigeria and Nigeria Center for Diseases Control. Immediately in Nigeria, when the first index case, an Italian who came to Nigeria on business trip, immediately it was discovered, it was reported, both locally and internationally, and this is how it should be. But for some other countries, there were deniers and self-deniers. Even up to now, some parts of some African countries and some states and some individuals are still denying that COVID-19 is real. Although this is far from the truth, it is a reality. Secondly, we need to be accurate by carefully checking all facts. We're looking at most African countries. This, if you want to score them, this we can put them on average score because the ability to check the facts, to be accurate and so on, because of their scarcity of data across board, we cannot have a certainty in terms of accuracy of facts and fact checking because of some challenges in the system. Number three is that we should be consistent by keeping spokesperson informed of crisis events and keep messaging, keep the messages constant. Of course, most African countries, they from time to time present information about COVID, but I have opportunity to speak with those who are not so well educated, and what they tell us is that they don't know anything other than to tell us the figures of those who have been infected, those who have died, those who have recovered. This happens to be most of their communication plan. Tell the people the number that have been infected, the current rate, and then those that have recovered, those that have died. And you will also notice that the WHO, most of the time, they are just emphasizing number of infection rate, fatality, and then those that have recovered. And this keeps the people all the more misinformed or disoriented, as it were. Number 4 is that make the public safety the number 1 priority. We have to admit that it is the priority of those that are managing COVID-19 across board that there should be public safety. But words are not enough. Other things need to be put in place. And this is where most of the African countries, they tend to lag behind. Number 5 is use all of the available communication channels, including the internet and all the other traditional media and new media platforms. This is as it should be, but in the African context, we are educated and literacy rate is increasing, but to limit your messages to just the traditional media and the internet in the African context, we will be missing the point, in the sense that there are many places that are unreached, and there are still many that were not educated, are not literate enough. And then even if they were educated, availability and access to platforms, internet platforms, media platforms are also constrained, which makes the alternative model that we talk about in scholarship in Nigeria, which is the indigenous communication system, which makes the indigenous communication system much more relevant. Community mobilization, going to the grassroots, street campaign, and all of that. All of this will have created enough awareness on the disease. Number 6, provide some expression of concern, sympathy and empathy for the victims. Well, the team that is managing COVID in Nigeria, when they want to announce the death, they will say, unfortunately, we lost XY number. This is how it should be. Even when the president wanted to address, in his addresses, he will always be empathic towards the people. And this is part of crisis communication. Then be ready to provide stress and trauma counseling to victims. Well, this is grossly lacking in the African context. So let's go to the next phase. Slide, please. Yes, thank you. The second angle of during the crisis, how to manage it, are a set of activities. Attack the accuser. Well, this is not applicable to us here. That's talking about if there is reputation challenge. We are not talking of reputation here. Denial. Well, this is applicable to COVID. Many are still at the self-denial stage. Scapegoating. This is also applicable. People want to refer to India and to China, where it originated, and so on and so forth. But this does not solve problem. Give excuses. This is also averagely so. Many people still give excuses for government failure, for this, for that. Integration, ingratitude, that's praising the stakeholders. Well, the health workers, for example, they receive a lot of praises and so on, but in terms of material comfort, it is doubtful, because there are many protests across some nations where health workers are saying we don't have enough protective materials, we don't have equipment, and many of the frontline officers, health workers, they are victims of COVID-19. And so this is a challenge in much of African countries. Provide justification. That's when you want to talk about reputation. Reminders, yes. Compensation is not there. Even when many African countries, they want to give relief packages when there were lockdown, it was doubtful that it reached a sizable portion of the population, which made the lockdown ineffective, because livelihood was challenged, and it is the issue of living and livelihood. And once livelihood is challenged, people can no longer stay in their homes. And so this becomes a problem. Let's go to the final part of it. Okay, next slide, please. So as a result of all of this, let's have illustrated cases in Nigeria, but just so to emphasize. In philosophy, there are three ways that you can handle that makes your message to be believable. There is the ethos, that's the ethics of communication. And then there is the logos, that's the logic of communication. Then there's also the pathos, which has to do with the emotional aspect of communication. When you evaluate much of the crisis management paradigms and strategies in much of African countries, particularly in Nigeria, we didn't see much of this play out, which is making their messages not to be believable, not to be thought to be credible, and perception on handling is on the negative. For example, delayed information dissemination. There's the overuse of negative fear appeal, and then the concept of isolation center, quarantine, seems to be alien to most people. So that means those who are designing the communications of COVID, they didn't take into consideration the issue of pathos. That's the empathic forms of communication. There's no feeling in them. So they tend to overuse negative appeals. And then, well, as we're going to see, communications are from different centers, which creates confusion. There's near absence of community engagement. We hardly engage with the real people that we actually want to save. And then there's also the credibility gap, where there are examples in Nigeria that we can give. Those who are managing COVID-19, initially they said if a victim dies of COVID-19, he will not be allowed to be buried by his relatives. So when high government officials, when they became victims and they lost their lives, they allow such government officials to be buried by their family members. And so people begin to see a double standard in all of this. And so that calls to question the ethos, that's the ethics of those who are managing it. So their credibility is called to question. And then they do not come up with facts and figures. Efforts are largely concentrated on traditional media and on social media. And not everyone in much of Africa have access to this. Then there is dearth of creative messages. They did not engage professionals in communication to handle much of their communication. And so you see that in terms of credibility, in terms of logics, in terms of empathy that we use to evaluate communications for acceptability, it is on the low side. And that makes the issue become all the more problematic. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Now, the Center for Disease Control says that these are the common failures in health crisis communication. One, mixed messages from multiple experts. Everybody is claiming to be expert, and that creates problem. Information is released late. There's also that paternalistic attributes. You are the father figure, you know everything, and you want to say everything. And so many of those committees that are managing COVID-19, they appear like that. We're not countering rumor and myths in real time. This is so because there are many things that the managers of COVID-19 committees are busy with, even the WHO, that they do not have enough time to counter this rumor, which make the rumor to begin to spread like wildfire. And then public power struggles and confusion. This we can see in many countries on the African continent. So let's go on, because it has been politicized. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So there is this area of our study that we call semiotics, sign, visuals, and so on and so forth. We've had to interview some people on the street about the what stands as the logo or the symbol of COVID-19. And people say this, when you watch TV, you go online, you see this kind of pictures that look so threatening. It looks like death itself. And that makes people want to say, sorry, this thing, we cannot handle it. So this creates denial, it creates anxiety, hopelessness, helplessness, and panic. So we need to switch more to sociological appeals than psychological or fear appeals in communications of this nature. Next, please. Thank you. Well, how do we now address the challenge of the infodemics? The first thing is that we should accept as a reality that the global community has the information that previous generations did not have. And so we should treat information now as a commodity. And therefore we should be precise, honest, open, and we should promote equality of access. In much of Africa, we don't have equality of access. I was trying to invite a colleague of mine in a part of the country to try to join this lecture, but he said there is no internet in his own part of the country. So under that situation, how can you manage the pandemic? Secondly, we should accept as a reality that we are in a knowledge society, and therefore knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination, and utilization of information are very critical in addressing the issue of the pandemic. So we should get more knowledge and get more information, and this comes on a pyramidal form. Let's go on to the next level. Okay, now how do we respond to the current conflict? I'm using the example of what we call coalition against COVID-19 in Nigeria. This is a private sector initiative, and it was led by giants in the industry, the likes of Aliko Dangote, of the international fame that has a lot of businesses in some part of Africa. The Central Bank of Nigeria is coordinating it. All the bankers association, the manufacturers association, and all of them, they agreed to pull resources together to support government on the management of COVID-19 in terms of facilities, in terms of money, in terms of awareness creation, and so on and so forth. For example, as at the last count, we had all the private sector in Nigeria, they put together around 15.3 billion Nigerian naira, which is like 38 million 709 million dollars, US dollars. So this is the kind of initiative that was put in place to support government efforts. And the reason for this is that the health system had virtually collapsed before the outbreak of COVID-19. So the private sector needed to come out to support government effort. And this is how it should be when we talk about corporate social responsibility. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, the private sector, apart from the money they made available, they also went into awareness generation campaigns in the social media, in the traditional media, on TV, and so on and so forth. And these are some of their messages, and we classify as pro bono campaigns. Did you know? Just biting your finger can make you to be vulnerable. If you don't cover your nose, you can be a victim, and several other messages. You can go to the next slide. But what we discover is that, let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Now, what we discover is that these messages, we just limited them to the traditional media and the social media. Good as they are not far-reaching enough. So we should now begin to emphasize to the individual the need to equip them with what we call media and information literacy skills. If individuals in society have media and information literacy skills, they will be able to separate between what's a myth, what's a reality, what is true, and what is fake about COVID-19. Again, we should focus on making the people to focus on the WHO and all the national centers of disease control as main sources of authentic information are in the case of COVID-19. And thirdly, we should be able to educate our people as scholars to act as a journalist. If you cannot cross-check and fact-check as a journalist, you don't publish, you don't release the information to another person. And so it is good that everybody will imbibe those skills of journalistic practices. You see the truth, where is the source, how authentic, and so on and so forth. And then we should focus on making people to know that if they are not sure of the source of their information, they should not share it. And media and information literacy should also show the people that even when you see pictures, visuals and images, they do sometimes lie. In the past we say pictures don't lie, but with technology today, pictures do lie. So people need to get that education. And so media and information literacy is key if we must combat this pandemic. Next slide. Thank you. Well, this is an example of the private sector contribution. At the background here, you see medical workers, and this center was put together by the private sector to create more treatment centers for those who have been infected. And this is how some African countries could also escape because of the level of corruption in some governments and inadequate attention to health care facilities. And so we should create hope rather than just focus on death. There is hope for the living as long as you follow the protocol. Next slide. Thank you. Now, well, the world is going to come out of COVID-19, but the experiences of COVID-19 should remain with us to handle future challenges to our health. And so these are the things that we expect in the post-crisis period. You should still deliver all information that you promise. When government promise that they are going to improve healthcare facilities and so on, that should be done in preparation for the future. We are not praying, but if it occurs. So thank you. Can I just see the last? Hello?
Yeah.
The last. There are two more slides to the bottom.
Another two more slides.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Just the last two, please, so that I can just conclude. Okay. Are you sharing with me? Let me just speak to my own if you.
1 second.
Okay. Just go to the second to the third to the last. Yes, third to the last. Okay. Now this second to the last, finally. Thank you. So I'm recommending in conclusion, we should use media professionals to handle aspects of communication on COVID-19. And then we must use more sociological appeals, and information must be accurate and timely. Then we should use community engagement, and the source of information must be credible. And those managing COVID-19 must walk the talk and they must talk the walk. And finally, we need to be first, be right, we need to be credible, we need to be empathic, we need to promote action, and we need to show respect to everyone in the society. On this note, I want to say thank you for having me in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 second. Let us slide 1 minute. Let them. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor. It was an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I think within a very short span, you agreed to deliver a lecture, and I think the whole yesterday you might be working on the slides, and I think you took a lot of pains to deliver an excellent lecture. It is very informative, and some of the theories which you explained were really relevant. And as you said, in this technology, the picture, the status of a picture, whether how can you believe a picture, we should be very cautious. So shall we take up some questions? Shall we take up some questions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. There is one question from Arin from MDU Haryana. Her question is, sir, role of media for awareness in pandemic COVID-19 situation in your country.
Can you repeat it?
This is a question from Arin.
Haryana.
Arin from Haryana. Haryana is our one of our
Right.
state. Her question is, sir, role of media for awareness in pandemic COVID-19 situation in your country. What is the role of media to bring awareness about the pandemic COVID-19 situation in your country?
Okay.
That's the question.
Can we take more?
No, you answer it. I'll come to the next question.
Okay, thank you. In Nigeria, we have a dynamic media system. Before now, we had the traditional media of prints, of broadcasts, and then the film, video, and all of those are in existence. And then we also have the social media that is very dynamic, and we have individuals that operate on the social media. We have both online and the offline media that people actually leverage on. And Nigeria has the largest concentration of media on the African continent. Even in terms of internet subscriptions, people on Facebook, on Instagram, and all the other social media platforms, Nigeria has the largest the largest concentration on the African continent. And so the Nigerian media has been so dynamic in handling COVID-19. Despite the lockdown, media professionals are on the streets to ensure that they hold accountable those who are managing COVID-19. Again, they do create awareness on a large-scale basis about the pandemic, about how to contain it, and so on and so forth. And then again, their interviews are always on a regular basis, interviewing personalities that are connected. And I also saw instances where those that have been discharged from the treatment center, the media follow them up so that they can narrate their experiences for others to learn from. And so you see that the media is very dynamic. More so, the media in Nigeria are not owned by government. They are largely private sector driven, and that makes them to be dynamic as it were. However, there were challenges in the way they did or they are doing their work. For example, government regulation at a time said journalists are not part of essential workers, and so they try to prevent them from going about their duty in the evening. They say there was a lockdown, and so they could not go out. But the media came out as a force to be able to debunk that, and government allowed them to keep going on to do their activities. So I can assess the media in Nigeria has been very dynamic. However, in the course of doing their job, there are challenges which make some of them susceptible and then hinder the practice of their profession. This is what the media is doing in Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's one question from Simon Varghese from National School of Journalism. The question is, since you are a communication expert, how can we contribute to increase social responsibility in very diverse and complex country like India?
Thank you. I'm coming. Well, corporate social responsibility is a philosophy of management, and it has at its center the need for corporate organizations and individuals to go beyond the legal requirements of doing business to see to the good of the society, to begin to execute programs and policies in the interest of the larger sector of the society. The philosophy of corporate social responsibility is that if you are a responsible corporate citizen, it is going to impact much more positively on your reputation, on your profit margin, and on your relevance to society. Beyond that, there is that aspect of doing good is good business, because we need to adopt the approach of being our brother's keepers. For societies like India, that is so rich and diverse in culture, in material resources, in leadership, in personalities. I was in Dubai, and I was in India, and I visited some of the state capitals, and I saw how expansive the economy is. But side by side with that is the issue of mass poverty. And in all societies in the world, you cannot have government address the needs of all the people at the same time. Even in Europe, in America, the private sector do contribute. My son in the US says, and we see it every day, when people need food, if you don't have money to buy food, you don't need to starve at home. And this is not what government alone does. And so in India, I see more of interventions by big corporations to addressing the needs of the people beyond what government is doing. And this is how corporations can make themselves relevant. And it has a positive effect on their reputation, on their acceptability, and on their profit margin. And more so, if the people do not exist, corporations cannot have the public to sell to. So we need to be more responsive to the needs of the people beyond what government is doing.
Okay, thank you, Professor. There's one question from Vinay M, Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Bangalore University. His question is, sir, what is the present situation of freedom of media in African countries?
Thank you. Yes, present situation of freedom of media in Africa. Well, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. Let me start by saying that there are two classifications of rights. There are fundamental rights, and there are fundamental human rights. On each of the African countries, they have in their constitution chapters devoted to fundamental rights that specify rights to freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of movement, and all of those freedoms that the United Nations Organization Charter of Freedom recognizes. But that is just at the legal or constitutional level. At the level of implementation, if you did a desk research on the internet, you will see that there are situations where journalists' lives are not secured by draconian policies, particularly in places where there are violence, war, and crisis in society, where there is civil war, there are ethnic wars, and so on. You see that journalists' lives are being threatened. And for governmental leaders, some of them, they do trump up charges to look for excuses to arrest and detain journalists. And then some of them, they also put the lives of journalists at stake by way of disappearances and so on and so forth. So these are the general picture, but it is not, there are individual differences within and between the countries of Africa. For example, in Nigeria, our constitutions guarantee all these rights, and the government try once in a while to close radio or media houses, but because of the articulacy, the vibrancy of the media, they rise up and they put government in check. Our constitution says the media, including journalists, broadcasters, they have that right to hold government accountable. And to a very large extent, the Nigerian media, they are doing that largely. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. We have the last question. Shreya Vishwanath wants to know, in India, the chat platforms like WhatsApp have been used to spread misinformation. How has Nigeria helped curb this misinformation circulation?
Thank you. There's something that you may not be able to control. In communication, we talk about public sphere. The public sphere is now available to all comers. In the past, we had what we call the gatekeepers theory for those who manage the news. But today there are alternative sources of reaching the people through the different platforms on the internet, the social media, and so on and so forth. Here in Nigeria, the legislature tried to bring up a law, in fact, an act of parliament. It was submitted as a bill to prescribe imprisonment for bloggers and for anyone that spread fake news and hate speech and all of that. But the legislature has not been able to succeed in doing this because of the vibrancy of the operators of the media and the society at large. And so the response is that some African countries come up with laws or enact laws that try to stifle the rights of the people to disseminate information. But that will not solve the problem, because we have cases where you say those who engage in armed robbery, they will be killed. Yet we have armed robbery on the increase on a daily basis. The solution is to educate the people and have professionals being involved in information dissemination, and people have the ability to cross-check, to fact-check, so that they do not just believe everything they see in the media. Draconian approaches anywhere in the world will not solve the problem of fake news or hate speech and so on and so forth. We need to get educated, and we need government to be tolerant of opposition so that people can have access to different lines of information at any particular time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Still, questions are started pouring in the chat box. There's one more question. Shall we take up?
Yes.
Yeah. There's one question from Prashant Malo. He's from Manipal University. Who do you think has worked more in terms of messaging and creating awareness during the pandemic? Is it the private NGOs or the government authorities in Africa? And what was the role of media during this pandemic?
Okay. Who has worked the highest or the hardest in terms of dissemination of information? Is it the private sector? Is it the government? Is it the media operators? The answer is not a straightforward, there's no straightforward approach to it. In Nigeria, for example, the government does not control substantially all of the media. They just control a section of the media, the government-owned media. So at their level, government-owned media, they also disseminate information about COVID-19. However, in terms of subscribers, in terms of audience base, government media tend not to have enough media audience that follow them because of perception of people that government information is always highly formal and that they tend to obscure the truth in instances. But the private sector media, they tend to be much more reliable and believable when it comes to information dissemination. And so in the Nigerian case, and in much of the other African countries like Kenya, the private and South Africa as well, the private sector media, they are at the forefront of information dissemination regarding the aspects of COVID-19. Now, what about the non-governmental organizations? Yes, we have pressure groups from time to time that also put government on their toes, but it is the organized media that give platforms for these non-governmental organizations to be able to express their views on the happenings in society. Of course, the bloggers are there, the individual internet users are also there, but by and large, the formal media sector in the country, they tend to be more at the forefront of the fight against the pandemic than the other sectors.
Okay, thank you. So now the last question, last one question we have. This is from Chaya Anil Kumar from Bishop Cotton Women's Christian College. Sir, how did your country handle the challenges faced by, questions have started pouring in. Chaya Anil Kumar has asked, how did your country handle the challenges faced by the education sector during the present COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you so much. This is a very interesting question. As the COVID-19 broke, the handlers, the stakeholders in the educational sector, they were very prompt and proactive in the sense that the Minister of Education issued an order that all institutions of learning should be closed down. And this was just so to prevent the spread of the pandemic among the younger generations. So it was just like 2 weeks after the outbreak of the pandemic, all schools were closed, and they still remain closed up to today. Then when it became obvious that this was going to be protracted, then different schools, private schools, government-owned schools, and so on and so forth, they began to take initiatives to move their students to the online platform to acquire some bit of interactions as far as teaching and learning is concerned. However, there's a challenge here. This is the challenge of platform, facilities, availability, affordability, and accessibility, in the sense that not many parents have the financial capability of acquiring the information gadgets to receive online lectures, and many students could not have access to data to receive online lectures from their universities. And even then, many of the private schools, because they depend on revenue that comes from students, they do not have access to money to sustain this kind of system, even to pay their workers. So that we now see a situation whereby the students have been staying at home. There are some skeletal facilities of teaching and learning online, but because of the factors I've enumerated, not many students could benefit from this. And then again, you also see that the privately owned schools, some of them could not pay their teachers, and government is not coming up with stimulus packages to addressing the needs of workers at that level. And of course, some state governments, they are not regular in the payment of salaries. And so you have all the different stakeholders being threatened with the issue of livelihood. The students' existence are threatened. For example, now, the current information in Nigeria is that the public examination that allows a student to transit from the secondary school to the university, the government says they cannot sit for the exam. And that will mean that 2-year losses for any particular student at this particular time. So these are some of the challenges associated with COVID-19 here in Nigeria. And that's how we've been coping.
Okay, thank you, Professor. There is one question from Nigeria.
Yes.
This is Gozi Kendrick from Avendo Medical College, Nigeria. The question is, with the rise on citizen journalism, how can people gain the needed technical know-how on how to publish accurate information?
Okay, thank you so much. The rising state of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and so on and so forth, of course, are not peculiar to Nigeria. But there are things that we have done as individuals and as organizations to confront this. Professor Rafi will recall that we attended a conference on media and information literacy in Morocco together at a particular time. And ever since that time, those of us in the classroom in Nigeria, we've taken that challenge to try to, even the journalists that are practicing, they try to create platforms where we raise awareness on media and information literacy. And we've had support of UNESCO and some other international bodies that we've organized conferences and training sessions for our students at the university level and at other, for the non-governmental organizations, for journalists. We have been organizing seminars and training programs for them on the need for media and information literacy. We have a professional body that we call the Association of Communication Scholars and Professionals of Nigeria. With the support of UNESCO, we were able to do animation schemes. We were able to produce books and also media messages that were distributed online about the need for media and information literacy. It's a protracted one. It's not something that we can do in a day. Even many people that are highly educated in society, they do not have enough media and information literacy skills to cope with the challenges of the contemporary era. And so we need to, we have also gone ahead to embedding media and information literacy in school curricula up to primary school level. And if we can do that from the primary school level upward, then we are able to address this into the future to ensure that we have quality media and information literacy across board. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. It was an excellent presentation, and you have, I think you have answered. There were meaningful questions also, I think you have answered. So on behalf of Department of Communication, Bangalore University, and all of us, I'm very grateful to Dr. Rotimi Williams OLATUNJI, Professor in Public Relations and Advertising, Dean, Lasso School of Communication, Lagos State University, Nigeria, for spending his valuable time. In spite of his busy schedule, he made it. He's a very good researcher, a very good communicator, a very good teacher, and his contribution to the field of public relations and advertising is something great. His books are referred globally, and he has a very good following throughout the globe. So, Professor OLATUNJI, and we are very grateful to you. On behalf of all of us, on behalf of our university, we are very grateful to you. Many, many thanks for spending your precious time and exchanging quite a lot of views, and especially your topic on crisis communication and social responsibility, especially on COVID-19, was very meaningful. It was very relevant. And I think not only Indians, I think all our friends throughout the globe are benefited by your lecture. We are very grateful to you, sir. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for having me here. It's a real privilege, and I'm proud to be associated with you and your faculty.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have to also take this privilege to thank my two colleagues, Dr. N. Sanjeev and Dr. Shailashri, Associate Professors, Department of Communication, Bangalore University, for their support and encouragement. And I also thank all my research scholars, students, and our staff for their hard work in making this program a success. And I'm very grateful to almost all the participants. If I go on naming them, it's a very huge list. So a lot of academicians, researchers, social scientists, research scholars, students from different parts of the country, different parts of the globe, especially my dear teachers from different parts of our state, almost a majority of our teachers from different universities within our state, outside the state, and a lot of friends from North India and from different parts of the country. You have joined us. We are very grateful for your roaring response, for your registration and your participation. I think even our Media Today series of international live faculty lectures, this was also very successful. Maybe again we'll be interacting with quite a lot of global scholars who will be speaking to you on the media situation. So Department of Communication, as all of you know, this is one of the oldest media schools in India. For every day I go on presenting about my department, and I think there are new people who doesn't know about the Department of Communication. We are nearing 50 years, and the contribution of this department to the field of media education is something great. The alumni is very strong, and for the last 1 month, I think we are successful in organizing a national webinar on the future of Indian media industry. We also celebrated our press day, and we were successful in organizing an international webinar where our professor OLATUNJI also attended. So we are very grateful to him also. It was a very successful series. And now we had this media today, the international live faculty lecture series. I think 2 lectures were very successful, and today we had a very excellent academician exchanging his views with all of us. Maybe in the coming days, we are planning to invite quite a lot of media experts and researchers, media professionals from different parts of the globe. And I think we will be discussing quite a lot of issues affecting not only media education, but also the media industry globally. As Professor OLATUNJI made a very important point, where in a country like Nigeria, because of this COVID-19, students will be losing 2 years. Imagine a student losing 2 years of his academic career. What will happen to his future? It's a very alarming situation. And even in the media industry is suffering globally, especially our Indian media industry. Gradually, we are suffering with quite a lot of problems because of the lockdown, because of quite a lot of, because especially in Indian situation, the print media was very strong. But there was a rumor and false information where it said, if you touch a copy of a newspaper, you will get COVID-19, the virus will spread. So the circulation of the newspaper came down, television production came down, film industry came down. So we are in a crisis. Dear friends, my dear media fraternity, please don't forget the fact, if the media industry suffers, we are also the sufferers. The field of media education will also suffer. Our universities will suffer. So we may have to strengthen the global media, and we're very happy that all the international experts have joined hands together, and maybe in the coming days we'll continue this international live faculty lecture series where we'll be inviting quite a lot of people. Once again, I thank one and all my dear friends and colleagues from different parts of the globe and different parts of the country. We're very grateful for your support and encouragement. Please don't worry about this COVID-19. Don't take away with false news. And whenever you need, as our professor said, please recheck, stop fake news. Let us stop the propaganda. Let us fight COVID-19. It is in our willpower. If we definitely unite, all of us can definitely fight COVID-19 and see to it this pandemic will definitely disappear within a very short span. And stay safe, be very careful. And as one of our slides shown by our professor, the life is in your hands. Please take precaution, take care, stay safe at any point of time. Don't be afraid of any virus. You can fight COVID-19. Let us all together, because it's a global village. The concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is our Indian concept. Let us fight COVID-19 globally. We will win, no doubt about it. Please stay safe. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much for your support and encouragement. Thank you very much. Namaste.